I can't believe it's been 10 years since the Still Brazy album by YG has dropped. And I want to talk about this today because I've been bumping to this album quite a lot recently. And with the close to 10-year anniversary coming up in June of this year, I figured to just talk about it, break down why this album is super great, why I consider it like a classic, and why I think it is a foreshadowing of what was to come in the foreseeable future. So again, background to Still Brazy, right? Still Brazy, the follow to 2014's My Crazy Life, which was YG's debut album at the time, a project that was filled with so many bops, so many bangers. This was like memeified so much and filled with so many tracks left and right that I'm pretty sure for many YG hardcore fans would know it from his debut album. And for me, when Still Brazy came out back in 2016, this project was already going through like this huge West Coast revival period that was already started back in 2015, thanks to the likes of like Kendrick Lamar's with Pivot Barfly, and of course with Dr. Dre's Compton soundtrack that also dropped the following year. But more specifically, Straight Outta Compton movie, which was like a documentary of NWA and to an extent the whole group in its whole was also dropped around that same time. So, with the West Coast scene booming, being this big, this massive, that hasn't been heard of in a really long time, because up until this point, hip hop, East Coast hip hop and Southern hip hop was just plastered all throughout mainstream and underground. Still Brazy was one of those projects that was able to maintain and continue the West Coast aesthetics. There are moments on this album that, before I dive deep into the songs that I like, where I was getting like Dr. Dre's The Chronic here to an extent. There's also some songs and some rap flows that YG flows on that also reminds me of like old school Eminem from like the Eminem Show era. Like this project has so many influences worn on its sleeve that you can that if you're a huge hardcore rap fan, you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck for this album. I also consider this like in my personal opinion like YG's best album ever to date because while yes, you can argue his other projects past Still Brazy are also good and are full of bangers, maybe they can outrival Still Brazy. There's something about this project that always makes me go back because of the catchy hooks, the catchy and super addicting production that's plastered throughout this album, and the inevitable themes that this album really tackles on. So I guess to start us off, we'll start with breaking down the songs here, right? There are 17 songs over here. I believe three of them are interludes or interludes to an extent. The shortest one being 3 seconds long with YGB Safe, which is pretty cool. But yeah, we got a really strong like start of this project with Don't Come to LA to Who Shot Me, which is a actual reference to a real life incident that happened back in 2015 where YG was shot 3 times when leaving his LA studio, which of course, in this one, he actually was able to recount the events and what he was feeling, the paranoia, and I really liked that this was like a really strong like way to set the groundwork of how Still Brazy was going to flow. I also think that YG's delivery on this album was like a lot more stronger, a lot more impactful, and would be like the set the stage and the tone of future YG projects that would come past this point. Another song highlight would be like Where's Bob featuring Slim 400, God Rest His Soul. Twist My Fingers, which is a total West Coast G Funk throwback, which is so good, it is absolutely addicting. The song Gimme Got Shot is also like a clear nod to old school Eminem, where it's like YG going back and forth, switching from different person to a different person. And it really just like, again, is going to that whole notion and that narrative like of people who just keeps on borrowing money, borrowing this, borrowing that. And of course, in this song "Gimme Got Shot," you already know what the answer to those problems is. The song "I Got a Question" featuring Lil Wayne, while it is a bit of a slow burner, I also think it's like one of the more underrated Lil Wayne features you're gonna hear. Some more highlights in this album include "Why You Always Hating" featuring Drake and Kamaya, which again I understand for many Drake haters alike currently in the modern day and age, like you have to understand. Back in 2016, when Drake dropped a feature, and this was pre before Views the album drop, a Drake feature was really big. It was super impactful. And again, this was around the time when Drake was still at the height of his career, and he was also again going through that same victory lap against Meek Mill from the previous year prior. So with Drake being on this song in particular, it's still really good. The feature's still killer, and it's just another song of YG just bragging about how much he's made it so big in the hip hop industry up until this point. There's also Boo Bomb Collective, She Wish She Was, featuring Joe Moses and J305. The title track was still Brazy. And then we go into the last three songs of the album. And this is where things get a little touchy of a subject matter. So, fair warning, I'm going to try my best to be as neutral about this as possible and not bring politics in the mix. And that is the 15th track with FDT, or also known as Fuck Donald Trump, which again is a pretty big anthem that was, obviously a diss towards Donald Trump, who was running president at the time, 2016. And it's pretty crazy to think that when this song essentially dropped and the music video for the song, like the original music video dropped, this one actually was in my view, it kind of was like a bit of a foreshadowing what was to come because after the 2016 elections, for everyone who's been kept under the radar, the rest has essentially been history. And now, because of where the political landscape is now in the current modern day age, even to this day, in Donald Trump's second term, there's been so many people really, really divided about how he's been running the country, his decisions, etc. And FDT was honestly a little bit ahead of its time. So for anyone thinking that I'm out this thing that I'm an instant Donald Trump hater, right? There is a valid, some really strong, valid points that the song makes for its time period, if that makes sense. And then to wrap up this amazing album, we have the second to last track with Blacks and Browns, which is a really nice depiction that's brutal and is blunt to your face about what the black community goes through, what the Latino community goes through, and how depressing it is to just grow up in Los Angeles, California. And I think it's really strong of a second closer, if not for the final track with Police Get Away with Murder, which again, the track more or less speaks for itself, like what it dives into. And YG does an incredible job, giving us this really good mental image of what it's like to be being at the brunt end of the police force coming at you no matter what. And this song ends in a really depressing but shocking way where YG then lists down every person who was killed by a police officer in one way, shape, or form who was innocent. And he ends it with a simple comment where he says, and they wonder why I look over my shoulder, which is a clear reference to the album cover that you see right here, which also kind of wraps up the themes of paranoia. And I gotta say, this last song here was, like I said, a foreshadowing of what would essentially become was the biggest protest to come out in 2020 with George Floyd, which again, I don't need to talk about what happened with George Floyd that year. Everyone was there. I know what happened at the time. You know what happened at the time when this happened. And this was a pretty big deal that, for me, this song, the final track here, sadly foreshadowed this big event that if something like this were to happen again, which it sadly did, a huge uproar, a huge protest will have came about as a result. And with that being said, there's so much more about this that I could talk about with YG Still Brazy, but I just gotta say, this album, in my view, is just a instant classic of an album. And there's so many different ways to breaking down this album even to this day. But I want to throw in my share of this album here at the end of the day. And I understand that maybe I didn't break this down fully to what it should be with each and every little song here, which is understandable, right? But this is a really good, really addicting album that I would highly recommend. And I feel like it's the gateway. If you really want to listen to YG's album, listen to YG Still Brazy. It's a great album. I think it's a classic 10 years later. And I think it is shockingly an album that was able to foreshadow a lot of the current events that's going on in the modern day and age 10 years later. And yeah, just want to simply rant and talk about YG Still Brazy. Great album. It's a classic. And yeah, that's it. I'll see you on the next one. Later.